Christopher John Reuel Tolkien, November 21, 1924, January 16, 2020, was the third son of the author J.R.R. Tolkien, 1892–1973, and the editor of much of his father's posthumously published work. He drew the original maps for his father's The Lord of the Rings, which he signed C.J.R.T. Christopher Tolkien was born in Leeds, England, the third and youngest son of John Ronald Reuel Tolkien and his wife, Edith Mary Tolkien, née Bratt. He was educated at the Dragon School, Oxford, and later at the Oratory School. He entered the Royal Air Force in summer 1943 and was sent to South Africa for flight training, completing the elementary flying course at 7 Air School, Kroonstad, and the service flying course at 25 Air School, Standerton. He was commissioned into the General Duties Branch of the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve on January 27, 1945 as a pilot officer on probation, emergency. He was given the service number 193,121. He briefly served as an RAF pilot. He transferred to the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve on June 28, 1945. His commission was confirmed and it was announced he was promoted to flying officer, war substantive, on July 27, 1945. After the war he studied English at Trinity College, Oxford, taking his BA in 1949 and his B.Lit a few years later. Tolkien had long been part of the critical audience for his father's fiction, first as a child listening to tales of Bilbo Baggins, which were published as The Hobbit, and then as a teenager and young adult offering much feedback on The Lord of the Rings during its 15-year gestation. He had the task of interpreting his father's sometimes self-contradictory maps of Middle-earth in order to produce the versions used in the books, and he redrew the main map in the late 1970s to clarify the lettering and correct some errors and omissions. J.R.R. Tolkien invited Tolkien to join the Inklings when he was 21 years old, making him the youngest member of the informal literary discussion society that included C.S. Lewis, Owen Barfield, Charles Williams, Warren Lewis, Lord David Cecil, and Neville Coghill. He published the Saga of King Hydrach the Wise, translated from the Icelandic with introduction, notes and appendices by Christopher Tolkien in 1960. Later, Tolkien followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a lecturer and tutor in English language at New College, Oxford, from 1964 to 1975. In 2016, he was given the Bodley Medal, an award that recognizes individuals for outstanding contributions to literature, culture, science, and communication. J.R.R. Tolkien wrote a great deal of material connected to the Middle-earth legendarium that was not published in his lifetime. He had originally intended to publish the Silmarillion along with The Lord of the Rings, and parts of it were in a finished state when he died in 1973, but the project was incomplete. Tolkien once referred to his son as his chief critic and collaborator, and named him his literary executor in his will. Tolkien organized the masses of his father's unpublished writings, some of them written on odd scraps of paper a half-century earlier. Much of the material was handwritten, frequently a fair draft was written over a half-erased first draft, and names of characters routinely changed between the beginning and end of the same draft. In the years following, Tolkien worked on the manuscripts and was able to produce an edition of the Silmarillion for publication in 1977. His assistant for part of this work was Guy Gavriel Kay, who became a noted fantasy author himself. The Silmarillion was followed by Unfinished Tales in 1980 and The History of Middle-earth in 12 volumes between 1983 and 1996. Most of the original source texts have been made public from which the Silmarillion was constructed. In April 2007, Tolkien published The Children of Hurin, whose story his father had brought to a relatively complete stage between 1951 and 1957 before abandoning it. This was one of J.R.R. Tolkien's earliest stories, its first version dating back to 1918. Several versions are published in the Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, and The History of Middle-earth. The Children of Hurin is a synthesis of these and other sources. Berain and Luthien is an editorial work and was published as a standalone book in 2017. The next year, The Fall of Gondolin was published also as an editorial work. The Children of Húrin, Berain, and Luthien, and The Fall of Gondolin make up the three great tales of the Elder Days which J.R.R. Tolkien considered to be the biggest stories of the First Age. HarperCollins published other J.R.R. Tolkien work edited by Tolkien which is not connected to the Middle-earth legendarium. The Legend of Sigurd and Gudrun appeared in May 2009, a verse retelling of the Norse Volsung cycle, followed by The Fall of Arthur in May 2013, and by Beowulf, a translation and commentary in May 2014. Tolkien also served as chairman of the Tolkien Estate, Limited, the entity formed to handle the business side of his father's literary legacy, and as a trustee of the Tolkien Charitable Trust, until his retirement in 2018. In 2001, he expressed doubts over the Lord of the Rings film trilogy directed by Peter Jackson, questioning the viability of a film interpretation that retained the essence of the work, but stressed that this was just his opinion. In a 2012 interview with Le Monde he criticized the film saying, "They gutted the book, making an action film for 15 to 25-year-olds. In 2008, Tolkien commenced legal proceedings against New Line Cinema, which he claimed owed his family £80 million in unpaid royalties. In September 2009, he and New Line reached an undisclosed settlement, and he withdrew his legal objection to the Hobbit films. Tolkien last lived in the French countryside with his second wife, Bailey Tolkien, née Classe, who edited J.R.R. Tolkien's The Father Christmas letters for posthumous publication. They had two children, Adam Reuel Tolkien and Rachel Claire Reuel Tolkien. In the wake of a dispute surrounding the making of the Lord of the Rings film trilogy, he disowned his son by his first marriage, barrister and novelist Simon Mario Reuel Tolkien, though they reconciled prior to Christopher's death.